From my left to my right, from civil society, Parminderjeet Singh from IT for Change, an advocacy organization in India. We have Nermeen El Sadani from the government of Egypt. We have Fiona Alexander from the United States government. We have Raul Echevarria from LACNIC. We have Jeff Brugman from AT&T. And finally, we have, as a replacement, Joy Liddicoat from the Association for Progressive Communications in New Zealand. I understood that we had an ICANN speaker on this panel as well, but we do not appear to. So, all right, we will proceed with what we have. I would like to start by referring back to something Giannis said in the previous panel, which is the point that one of the ways you can reach agreement in these kinds of heated international discussions, and anybody who was in the WSIS negotiations in Tunis in 2005 will remember that they were indeed heated, and often, in fact, the rooms were heated, and that they often ran rather late, and people were tired and everything else. One of the ways you can resolve deep differences among members is to come up with diplomatic language into which everybody can read or project their own sense of victory. And you get text that's a bit like a Rorschach test. People see what they want to see in it. And that may be fine in terms of concluding a meeting successfully and getting out of the room. But as Giannis also noted, when it comes then to implementation, you find out that vague formulations lead to all kinds of continuing conflict. And I think we should not be shy about saying this. It's been a subject of great controversy, enhanced cooperation, in the period since 2005. The reason we have organized this event, and I participated in the group that set this up, and I will tell you that the APC and ISOC and the International Chamber of Commerce worked very hard to find common ground on everything, was precisely because of the feeling that the process in the intergovernmental kinds of forums, such as the CSTD discussions we had last in the summer, has been stuck. And so we thought that by bringing together a group here under the aegis of the IGF, comprising the different stakeholder groups, that perhaps we could start to begin to listen to each other a little bit more and start to recognize the areas of commonality and be clear on the areas of difference in a way that perhaps pointed towards a more operational approach going forward. So that's what we're trying to do here today. I think we should not shy away from the controversy. We should not shy away from the fact that people have sharply different views on these matters, and we should give full air to them and try and get each side to understand the other's perspective. I think that's an entirely good and useful function for this event. Since I did not hear it actually read out, I think it's useful for us to begin by knowing exactly what we're talking about here. So I'm going to read you, at the risk of boring you, it's not very long, the operative language from the Tunis agenda. Now, there's a debate about where one would start in reading that language, and I'll return to that point in a second. Most people, I think, usually, though, would start at paragraph 69. We further recognize the need for enhanced cooperation in the future to enable governments on an equal footing to carry out their roles and responsibilities in international public policy issues pertaining to the Internet, but not in the day-to-day technical and operational matters that do not impact on Internet public policy issues. And that's a wonderful piece of word crafting there. Then paragraph 70 says, using relevant international organizations, such cooperation should include the development of globally applicable principles on public policy issues associated with the coordination and management of critical Internet resources. In this regard, we call upon the organizations responsible for essential tasks associated with the Internet to contribute to creating an environment that facilitates this development of public policy principles. And finally, paragraph 71 says, the process towards enhanced cooperation to be started by the UN Secretary General involving all relevant organizations by the end of the first quarter of 2006 will involve all stakeholders in their respective roles, will proceed as quickly as possible, consistent with legal process, and will be responsive to innovation. Relevant organizations should commence a process towards enhanced cooperation involving all stakeholders, proceeding as quickly as possible and responsive to innovation. Twice. The same relevant organization shall be requested to provide annual performance reports. So those are the three paragraphs that people tend to focus on. And in there, then, we find several elements. The need for governments on an equal footing to carry out their roles and responsibilities in public policy. A second paragraph about using relevant international organizations, advancing the process of establishing principles for public policy issues associated with the net, and the organizations that are involved with essential tasks such as ICANN and other non-governmental international organizations are part of that mix. And then thirdly, a UN Secretary General initiated process which parallels, again, the relevant organizations commencing a process as well. So we have people saying, and we've had for some time, people looking at different parts of this and saying different things. Some people look at the part that says the existing organizations that are managing important parts of the internet shall undertake steps. And we will talk about how some of those existing organizations have indeed taken steps to help governments begin to work on international public policy issues. You are here. Do you want to be on this panel? Then can we find a way to squeeze Tarek onto this panel? We need another chair. I don't know if this is a self-help organization, Tarek. If I hate to ask a former minister, but maybe you could pick up your own chair and just come to the end. I don't know any other way to do that. Well, which end are you going to? This end. Yeah. So we have had a situation where people involved with the existing institutions involved in critical internet resources point to the work that's been done there, which is substantial, enhancing the role of the GAC, the Government Advisory Committee, and so on, and saying, well, and all the other technical bodies too, and saying, well, we're doing enhanced cooperation. Then we've had a second group of people saying, yes, but it's not enough, and the UN Secretary General initiated process is not what we had hoped for. And I guess reading into that, the notion of creating a new platform that would satisfy those needs. And so you get into this binary discussion that's run for quite some time back and forth. Enhanced cooperation is happening, no, it's not happening, or it's not happening enough. This is probably not the most productive way to go forward. I think we need to recognize anybody who looks empirically at what was happening in the existing technical bodies that indeed they are taking up that part of the mandate that pertains to them and have been putting in place mechanisms that help governments pursue international principles for public policy. The GAC has released many principles with regard to new GTLDs and so on, for example. At the same time, we also have concern from some people saying, but that's not enough. There's other things that are not being done that need to be done, and there's no place to do them, and we need a new platform. Some people say that platform could be in the CSTD. Some of us believe the platform could be in the IGF. And Avri Doria will speak in the afternoon, and she will argue, I'm sure, that you should read more of the paragraphs around 69 to 71, which pertain to the IGF, as the framing for where this should take place. So that's the background. I want to get then the folks who are involved in the existing processes to tell us what they have been doing to promote enhanced cooperation. The folks who have been saying, but that's not enough, to tell us what it is they think is not enough and how it might be done better, and then get the two sides to actually respond to each other and discuss what are the areas where we could perhaps agree, if we can, on the need for something to go forward. So with all that said, let's start with the folks who would argue, I gather, that the existing institutions are fully discharging their mandate to promote enhanced cooperation. I'll start with perhaps Raul Echeverria, who's involved in a critical part of that landscape, the management of IP numbers. Raul, perhaps you could give some thoughts about what the technical community and the administrative bodies have been doing to promote enhanced cooperation.
Okay. It's strange because I don't feel the audio, so I don't know if people is listening what I say. But okay. Yes, you are right, Bill, and I have been part of this discussion from the very beginning because myself and some few people that is here in the room were in the room where this expression of enhanced cooperation was born, and you described it quite well what was the motivation for using this expression. I would add only that at that time, while the only motivation was not to feel ourselves as winners of the situation, because at that time everybody was interested in getting a solution and an agreement for the wishes, and so this is the only formula that was found for getting that agreement. In the last 7 years, I think that the situation has changed dramatically, very much, and I can speak I can speak properly about the Latin American and Caribbean example. And so 7 years ago, we didn't have almost any contact with governments, and now we have a very good relationship between all stakeholders. And I think that probably Latin America and Caribbean is an exemplarity region in that sense, because the relationship among stakeholders is very good. The governments and everybody is able to participate in things that relate with to LACNIC, but also LACNIC has seats in several intergovernmental forums. This is almost the same thing is happening, at least speaking about the RIRs in other regions. All the RIRs are taking measures in trying to promote the participation of all stakeholders and trying to be engaged with other stakeholders in different processes, but also increase the engagement of other stakeholders in the RIRs issues. I think that's if we would not have had that discussion about enhanced cooperation in 2005, probably the situation today would be very different, and we would have made much less progresses in this interaction. But it is important to recognize that when we started this discussion, we were talking mainly about IP addresses, root servers, and domain name system management. But now, today, some of the most important decisions on internet governance are taken in other environments. If we are coherent with the definition that we agreed on internet governance is much broader than just managing critical internet resources. Many important decisions are being taken today in intergovernmental forums, and so I think that it is very important if some people feel that we should discuss more about enhanced cooperation and should look for new solutions or new forms of engage better different stakeholders. I think that we have to do that. But as the Brazilian ambassador said before, we should not anticipate conclusions, and we should be able to discuss everything, because I think that we have done much more progresses in critical internet resources management and in the internet technical community matters than in some things that I said before are being discussed in intergovernmental forums like Wikid, for example. we are very fortunate in Latin America that we have a good participation in intergovernmental forums, but it is not the same that is happening at the global level. So I think that's we should make progress also, and in that sense. And of course, there is not a single solution for enhanced cooperation, because enhanced cooperation is just to enhance the cooperation among stakeholders in all the different pieces of internet governance ecosystem. But it is. I think that it's not the right approach to look for a one single solution that fit all the needs of participation in all the internet governance mechanism. Thank you.
But Raul, if I could just press you a little bit more, could you give me just a couple of examples of how the regional internet registries in their functions are contributing to the creation or an environment that would help governments establish principles and establish public policies on the internet?
For example, just one example, we have a group of governmental officers participating in LACNIC. There are more than 100 officers from the governments from our region that are in that list, and we keep them informed. We call them for meetings. We have had face-to-face meetings and also teleconferences, and we are open to receive any comment from them. And of course, I think that's my feeling is that they don't want to be involved in details about IP addresses management, but it's good to have this channel of communication. And as we have built together, with LACNIC has been one of the promoters together with APC, other NGOs, NUPE from Brazil, but we are very engaged with governments in the construction of a good preparatory process for IGF in the region. And in fact, we are now working together toward more formalization of that process. And this is something that we are doing together. And when this is not just about IP address management, but it includes also any discussion or any topic about internet address management, of course.
Okay, thank you. Are you settled in down there now? Okay. I would like to welcome to the panel our late arrival, former Minister of Communications from Egypt and now advisor to the CEO of ICANN for Global Policy, Tarek Kamel. Tarek, perhaps you could talk a little bit about how ICANN has been taking steps to try to fulfill its mandate to help advance enhanced cooperation. The floor is yours. Okay, we have a problem?
No,
Okay.
seats and
None of them are still
We're going to rotate seats.
Yeah.
Even this, this is all good. He doesn't need it right. Only the notes.
While we get settled in, I will also just add one quick point. The last event started late because people were late getting into the building, and so we will take this a bit late as well. We had a lunch scheduled for an hour and a half. I think we could probably eat our sandwiches in an hour, so I think we will take this session until about 1:30 p.m. and then break. Okay, so we have time.
Yeah.
There will be plenty of opportunity for discussion with the audience. So, Tarek, take it away.
Thank you, William, for the introduction, and sorry for being a bit late because of the traffic. I share the view that Raul has just mentioned, that there is not one single solution for enhanced cooperation. And I was part at that time of the WISIS process in 2005, and preparing at that time the Tunis agenda, where we had the IGF as a recommendation and enhanced cooperation also also came out. So I would really definitely also support that there was not one single vision at that time what enhanced cooperation should be. And nobody has said, even at that time back in the WSIS in Tunis, that enhanced cooperation is necessarily only government-based cooperation or should be government-based cooperation. It is definitely several solutions on a local level and on a regional level as well as on a global level. And let me try to share with you what ICANN and others has been doing within the last couple of years, in the last 5 or 6 years. Definitely on the GAC level, enhanced cooperation has happened very drastically. At that time, 5-6 years ago, we had only maybe 40 or 50 members in the GAC. Now we are over 100 members in the GAC, active members in the GAC. Not only that, but we have also the African Union as an observer. The European Union is there also participating in the GAC. And all these are examples of enhanced cooperation within the Government Advisory Committee and within ICANN that has happened within the last couple of years. In addition to that, we have a couple of IGOs as well, international intergovernmental organizations, attending the GAC as observers and providing their views as well in this aspect. The affirmation of commitment has definitely been an example of enhanced cooperation for ICANN within the last couple of years, and the ATRT and the recommendation that has happened and have been implemented on various levels are an example of enhanced cooperation. There might be a next round of ATRT and next round of revisions in the future, where we would like to see more governments more involved in the review process, but definitely the review process has been a success and is considered as an example of enhanced cooperation that we are proud of. In addition to that, on an intergovernmental level, there has been a cooperation between ICANN and UNESCO and other players in IDN. Yannis Karklins is here, and there has been a great work that has been done to develop the IDNs on a CCTLD level back in 2009 and 2010, and another example of multilingualism on enhanced cooperation with intergovernmental organization between ICANN and intergovernmental organization and various other players as well. The IGF by itself is a great example of multi-stakeholderism and enhanced cooperation, and ICANN is supporting strongly the IGF via participation, workshops and other means as well, and will continue to support the IGF because it's a wonderful model of enhanced cooperation, of multi-stakeholderism that is unique worldwide in my opinion when it comes to governance of one resource. We have been also participating in the IGF improvements, for example, the CSTD and the recommendation of the CSTD under the ISOC that has been concluded last May. ICANN was there with its contribution on IGF improvement, and another example of enhanced cooperation. Enhanced cooperation is not only on a regional level and a global level, it's within the countries itself. Look at India, look at Brazil, look at Egypt. Great examples of multi-stakeholder models for internet governance within the countries itself. And this is another model of enhanced cooperation that has evolved since Tunis 2005, and there are other countries that are also coming and joining these examples of enhanced cooperation. We are really proud of these countries and other countries. I don't want to miss other countries of great examples of enhanced cooperation and adopting the multi-stakeholder model for internet governance on a local level, not only participating in the global IG ecosystem, but also on a local level. And at last but not least, we look forward. ICANN is internationalizing itself more and more, and our new president and CEO has announced that recently, and we have a strong plan for engagement in Africa and Latin America, which would empower definitely enhanced cooperation as well, and would take us of a next level of inclusion, working together with governments and with civil society and with private sector in order to make sure that we develop the DNS industries and empower it in those parts of the world. And this will bring further enhanced cooperation, and it will ensure inclusion from this part of the world within the ICANN process. So there has been multiple steps that has been taken on a regional level and on a global level to enhance the participation in the ICANN process and really to be part of the overall vision of enhanced cooperation that we are trying in a multi-stakeholder spirit to develop on a global level. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tarek. That was an excellent overview of steps taken in ICANN and elsewhere, and I'm always very pleased to have somebody else in the panel who talks as fast as I do. I would like to... it's greatly appreciated. You can confuse the interpreters as well as I can. You mentioned the affirmation of commitments as an example of enhanced cooperation, and I find myself sitting next to somebody who had something of a role in the affirmation of commitments. So I'm wondering if perhaps Fiona Alexander from the U.S. government might like to share her thoughts on what steps have been taken so far with regard to enhanced cooperation within the existing institutions and what more, if anything, needs to be done. And does yours work?
Yes, because the one that Tarek. So it's the same mic, so it should work. So I think Tarek did a good job of explaining a lot of the things that we've been doing and focusing on in the U.S. government within the ICANN system. But your specific question about the affirmation, I think, is an interesting one, especially putting in context of the WSIS text, which I haven't looked at in a while. It's interesting to see how it still withstands the test of time almost 10 years later. But the idea of the affirmation was to take a role that was perceived to be one that the U.S. government itself only had, and to open it up and internationalize it and open it up to all stakeholders. So what the affirmation does is it takes a role that the U.S. government had in terms of reviewing ICANN's progress through updates to the MOU and annual reports, and really changes that program and process so that you have 4 review teams that are open up to stakeholders from all around the world. The affirmation never expires, so it establishes this long-lasting, continual framework to evaluate ICANN's progress by the ICANN community and other stakeholders. In the context of the example that Tarek gave, the Accountability and Transparency Review Team was the first review team that occurred, and then the next one's actually getting ready to start probably in the January or February timeframe. But what you had stakeholders from within and beyond ICANN, from all parts of the stakeholder community, from government, civil society, from industry within inside ICANN, industry outside ICANN, to actually take a look and see if ICANN was living up to its own commitments and what it had promised to do. Gave a series of 27 very focused recommendations that the board then adopted and have been in the process of implementing. So from our perspective, the idea of letting the international community evaluate ICANN, offer some suggestions to how to continually improve ICANN, was a great step forward in terms of enhanced cooperation, and it's a good one. I think one of the other ones that Tarek spoke about briefly was internationalized domain names, and I think another perspective to set was during the time of the WSIS process, there were no IDNs. That hadn't happened yet, and the IDN CCTLD process went forward quite quickly once the GAC and the CCNSO got together and agreed to the fast-track principles, once the IETF finalized the actual technical standards, and once UNESCO helped to finalize some of the language tables. So then I think we're up to 30 or 40 IDN CCTLDs. So during the time of the WSIS process, there were none, but you have the GAC, you have the CCNSO working with an ICANN, you have the IETF finalizing standards, UNESCO helping with the language tables, all these groups coming together, and you now have 32 countries that have their country code top-level domain name and their local language. So again, another really positive example of enhanced cooperation. In the U.S., we're actually also, continuing to try to live by what we preach, and we're incorporating this multi-stakeholder context in how we work. One example is the U.S. IGF, and there are lots of folks in this room that participate in that, and that can speak to the outcomes from that process and bringing our domestic stakeholders together. What I witnessed is we were very well practiced at talking internationally. Because of the 10 years of the WSIS process and leading up to it, we weren't as used to talking to each other domestically about domestic issues. So that's been a nice transition. And then also in the U.S., we're developing and adopting this model as we go forward with commercial data privacy. NTIA is convening a multi-stakeholder process to develop privacy codes of conduct. So within NTIA and within the U.S. government, we're taking this model and we're actually using it internationally in the institutions we participate in, whether it's ICANN or IETF or other places, but also using it to develop domestic policy as well. So there's a lot of different versions of enhanced cooperation.
If I can just press you a little further on one point. There are those who would argue, okay, the affirmation of commitments is a very interesting new model of cooperation and so on. However, still you have this U.S. role that is special, okay? And for them, that remains an issue. On the other hand, one could say it's interesting how the United States does things like with the IANA review and so on, these open public comments where you take views in from everywhere around the world and kind of channel these into the policy process. So, it's a matter of balancing these things. But how do you respond to this point that many people would make? Yes, you've got this nice new model, but still there's a special role for the U.S., and that's somehow an issue.
So I think the specific issue is the IANA functions contract, and we still have the reality of the historical origins of the Internet, and we're slowly evolving things as quickly as we can. And I think folks that even criticize current constructs would acknowledge we made a lot of progress in the last 10 years, and the last 3 in particular. But with respect to the IANA contract, we took an unprecedented move and put the terms of reference for the contract out for public comment. We did a second round of public comment to say, we think this is what we heard you say, we just want to make sure we've got you correctly. And then we put the comment out for bid. Based on the comments from the international community, there were a series of additional requirements added to the contract specific to meet the needs of international stakeholders, including respect for local law, a separation of policy and implementation, and conflict of interest. And then we went through our normal government procurement process, whereby at one point we actually canceled the RFP because no bidder had actually met the requirements of the international community. We then went through a second process to put it out again, and then we're successful in the award of the second contract. So I appreciate the sensitivities, and we're continuing to evolve things as much as we can. The new contract really does have a deference to domestic stakeholders. It really has a deference to public policy discussions and rules being set by the users of the IANA functions contract, not the United States government or ICANN. And the implementation of this contract really will continue to push and internationalize how the system is run.
Thank you very much, Fiona. Let me turn to Jeff Brugman from AT&T for a final sort of take on the perspective that the existing institutions are moving things forward and so on.
Thanks, Bill. I first want to go back to some of your initial comments, which is, having been at the New York discussion on enhanced cooperation and then the discussion in Geneva, I think a lot of times it was focused on either referendum on multi-stakeholder versus governmental process, or a referendum on existing organizations. And I think the idea of the mapping, to me, is a great way to try and break the deadlock on those types of binary judgmental decisions by saying there's a lot of activity happening. We should look closely at that level of activity and at the issues there and assess what's working, what's not working, and what could be improved. So from a business perspective, I tend to think very pragmatically. Enhanced cooperation and the IGF, for that matter, are a means to an end. What are we trying to solve? I think we're trying to improve Internet policy making on a global basis, and obviously we're trying to do that for the benefit of Internet users. So I think it helps to start with some of what Bill Woodcock mentioned this morning and thinking about how have things been working, what's working and what's not working. And certainly there has been an enormous expansion of the Internet geographically, capacity-wise, and in terms of technical capabilities. So from a business perspective, one of our central tenets certainly is do no harm. So if we're going to improve Internet policy making, it should be to make all of those things work better, not to do things that are going to be disruptive. I think participation is a key issue, and we've talked about that today. It's something where you could view it as there's always more that can be done. Yeah. So I think certainly there has been an enormous growth of engagement, both, as Ralph said, both substantively, level of energy-wise, as well as in terms of people in the Internet governance process. And enhanced cooperation, to me, is a very compatible way of thinking about it in terms of governments. How do governments get more involved, whether it's existing organizations, working with each other, and also engaging their own citizens in the process? So, again, I think if we view enhanced cooperation broadly, it's an obligation all of us have to further the process. And there are things that are working well, and there are things that could certainly be improved. And then finally, I think you have to look at it from how are the substantive policy issues being addressed? Are they successfully being challenged and taken on? And there again, I think you certainly can say that we've made a continued effort to try and identify new issues, and as well as make progress on dealing with existing issues. And I think compared to certainly, if one compares the Internet policy issues with how policy making on other global challenges is being met, I would say it holds up very well in terms of both the level of cooperation and the level of consensus building that's been able to happen here. And I guess I'd like to close on a very important point that I think Janis Karkland made, which is, to me, one of the main areas of progress has been bridging the very technical operation of the Internet with a very high-level government policy view. And if those are kept separate, it can be very damaging in either direction. So a lot of technical decisions have very important policy implications. On the other hand, having either a government-led or any other type of policy discussion about the Internet in a vacuum away from the technical and operational issues of how it works equally would be, I think, harmful and damaging. So as a practical matter, I find it hard to see how you have one central place where you can take all of the vast number of issues that we're dealing with on the Internet and solve them in one set of one platform or one set of principles. However, I think there is a role for the high-level consensus building in terms of where do we directionally want to see the Internet going. So again, as with a lot of these things, I think moving away from binary choices and moving towards areas where what are the gaps specifically that we're trying to solve, and starting with what are the existing organizations and processes that are out there. Can we work within those, and if not, why not? Certainly seems like a much better way to proceed to me. Thank you.
Thanks very much. So from a governance standpoint, we're ahead of the climate change people. So I guess that's pretty good. Maybe we can switch then to a different perspective. Parminder, I wonder what your thoughts might be on the sufficiency of the existing efforts and whether anything's missing, and if so, what exactly?
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, from what I have heard till now, it would appear that more or less what's going on in the sphere of global internet governance is fine, not much wrong with it. And I have the unpleasant task of trying to figure out what may be wrong with it. I think, focusing on enhanced cooperation, we can differ on real issues. We think this particular kind of process is good, it's not good. But I think before that, agreeing on what are we talking about is important. And it doesn't serve the discussion very well if, I know there are differences of perspectives, but if they become so foundational and so diffused about the very meaning of the terms we talk about, that really does not let us go to the real issue, which is very fine. Some people would agree certain processes are good for the people, for them, for the internet, and others would not agree, and that's very fine. But the problem is about what are we talking about, and Bill did quote from the Tunis agenda. Again, an unpleasant task, but I need to also quote from it. But I'll try to paraphrase things, so I'll be quick. Now, it's very clear that in Tunis agenda, they meant public enhanced cooperation as the way in which governments can do the public policy role in the global policy spaces. And anything which helps them do that would be enhanced cooperation. I heard a lot of people talk about, meeting within countries is enhanced cooperation, civil society meeting somebody else is enhanced cooperation. I think just we should get out of that part of it, because it's not being spoken in the English language meaning of two people enhancing their friendship. That's not what we are talking about. And if we keep that part out, we would be focused on a particular technical term with still a range of views about it, but still a narrower space about what we are talking about. And I think enhanced cooperation is clearly a means whereby governments are able to fulfill their public policy role. So that let's stay within that. Global public policy roles. Now, whether there are global public policies issues to be addressed or not, I'll come back to it later. But that's what enhanced cooperation is. Now, second category issue here in the Tunis agenda is that after it talks about the 69 paragraph, when it talks about we recognize the need for enhanced cooperation in international public policy issues and so on, the next paragraph says that such enhanced cooperation shall include development of public policy principles on technical management. Shall include, but does not exhaustively consist of. It's very clear enhanced cooperation consists of a lot of general public policy issues, and it consists of public policy principles which relate to critical internet resources. Can we separate two discussions? And for a long time, I'm a votary of having these two discussions in two different rooms so that we do not keep on talking about the enhanced cooperations vis-a-vis critical internet resources. I have seen this panel. Nobody talked about any other public policy issue other than the critical internet resources related public policy issues. Tunis agenda is absolutely clear. It is a small part of the overall set of public policy issues. And if we can have two separate discussions in which one of which we do not mention the public policy issues about the CIRs, it would be a great progress forward. Now, there is a reason why this happens, and I will try to point to it. We have heard a lot of people say that there's a lot of enhanced cooperation taking place, which means that governments are being enabled to fulfill their public policy roles. Okay, I agree there is a lot of stuff happening here. Though there are issues about US oversight, there are issues about not only the fact it signs the INA contract, but every single action of ICANN is subject to US court jurisdiction. One adverse US court jurisdiction can unravel the whole system on which ICANN works. One GTLD being told to be anti-competitive means ICANN has to change its policies, and that the whole facade of being an international organization goes. I still want to leave that, and let's say things are fine. I don't think ICANN does important work, but not very important work from the perspective from what I see. There is another set of areas. Now, we're trying to look at questions. Are there public policy issues to be addressed? Is it too early to be addressing them? Or maybe there aren't any? If there aren't any, why is OECD's Committee on Computer, I do not know the right sequence, but CCICP is a Communication, Computers and Information Policy, does precisely the work of doing internet-related policy, which has nothing to do with CIR management. I'm talking about that set. I want at least half of this discussion to talk about that set. Now, if there's nothing to be done there, why does that committee exist? If only multi-stakeholder model is the way those policies should be developed, why is that committee no more multi-stakeholder than what it is? And by the way, India's proposal of SERP is exactly on the same multi-stakeholder model as OECD's Committee on Computer, Information and Communication Policies. They last year developed principles for internet policy making. That's precisely what enhanced cooperations mechanisms do. And if OECD thinks it is important to develop principles for internet policy making, why shouldn't all of the nations think that it is important to develop internet related public policy principles? Can somebody give me that answer? And not only did OECD do it, Council of Europe also has developed principles for internet policy making. Why shouldn't other countries together develop principles for internet policy making? Is a simple enhanced cooperation question nobody seems to be willing to answer, and I'm happy to hear anybody on the panel or in the crowd here answer that question. And the last part is about multi-stakeholderism. I'm happy to find out what do people really want is as the mechanism in which this non-critical internet resource policies should be made. I'm happy to take it. Let somebody give a model. Let somebody say the SIRP model of advisory groups is not okay. They need somebody to be voting inside with the government when they talk about global network neutrality, when they talk about social role of internet intermediaries, they talk about the economy of personal data. All these subjects OECD is right now working on. CO is working on search engine guidelines, they're working on social media guidelines, they're working on cross-border data. All those issues, if you think there's a multi-stakeholder model, do only suggest to me, but also suggest to OECD and Council of Europe. And I think there is a big match here. Ambassador Karklins did talk about equal footing and the different roles of stakeholder. I do not accept the definition of Tunis agenda of respective role, but I do not also accept there's an equal footing in making those kind of policies. So put forward a role, but my primary question again goes back. If there is no public policy issue to be addressed and no public policy principles to be made, why is OECD making it? And the same people who sit and make it in the OECD, how and why do they oppose if the UN or all other countries want to make it, and why does civil society, business and technical community do not oppose that inside OECD but opposes it in international forums? Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I think actually Raul did refer, though, to some of the broader aspects, unless I missed him. But your basic point then is not that you dispute that the existing bodies are within their areas of competence taking measures to enable governments to adopt principles and so on, but more that in the other arenas of internet governance outside of CIR management, there is an institutional gap and a set of issues where the international community has no place to address them. That's your principal thrust, is that right?
Yeah, in very short. The difference, is not quantitative. It's not sufficient is happening. Difference is of category. CIR public policy issues a very small set of, for me, very unimportant issues. Non-CIR issues which OECD deals with is a huge set of very important issues for the society. And I want enhanced cooperation to focus on that. And there's an absolute institutional vacuum, and few rich countries are trying to make policies for the whole world, which is not acceptable for the whole world. So I agree with you, yes.
Okay. I've got all the other panelists are looking eager to respond, but we're not going to start responding to each other yet until we hear from everybody. And there's two more I'd like to hear from. Nermeen certainly has views coming from the Egyptian government on any of these points. Perhaps you could build on where Parminder left off.
Okay, thanks, Drake. Actually, I was going to speak on behalf of the Egyptian government, but if you allow me, I would love to speak and bring to the table and the discussion the views from emerging economies, Arab countries, as well as some African countries, so that we have some diversity in views regarding who is favoring what is happening in the enhanced cooperation and internet governance ground, other than speaking in a more positive tone about that it's happening and so on and so forth. So if you allow me, I will be speaking on behalf of other countries that are not present here. Now, the Tunis agenda, or the WSIS Article 69 and 70, mentioned the role of the governments in the public policy issues pertaining to enhanced cooperation and fostering this kind of mechanism among governments, but not in the day-to-day technical issues pertaining to internet governance. And some of the views here says or asks the question why not the government has a role or could have a role in this particular area, and why the governments are not really incorporating their own or assuming a real or serious role in the management of internet governance. And this brings me as well to the ecosystem of the internet governance. And in my personal views, I would see the internet governance and enhanced cooperation as a big puzzle that should be entangled together in harmony. And I would like here to underline the word harmony, because each organization that is relevant to the internet, the RIRs, the ISOC corporation, registrar, and so on and so forth, ICANN, of course, and every other organization has its own flavor and its own culture and its own bylaws and so on, and they all work together in somehow in harmony, that we have now a robust internet, a stable internet, and of course a very much developing media that we are all benefiting from on all levels. So if we all agree that internet now is helping all kind of economy, socio-economic development of all countries, not only developed world, but as well the developing worlds, then if everyone in this globe should have a role somehow. So the question is, I would say, it's not that whether or not enhanced cooperation is happening, but whether enhanced cooperation is happening enough, or what is happening now on the ground is enough and satisfactory to all participants from all the globe, not in a particular part or a sense. In this area, I would like to comment on what was discussed in the morning session about the establishment of working group. I think that there is something missing here. we can believe or we can think or agree that there is something taking place on enhanced cooperation that is good, but maybe not enough for everyone. So maybe a continuation of the discussion is necessarily, and I would love to see some linkage between the Internet Governance Forum as a robust platform where everyone can speak freely and every stakeholder is well represented, and what is going to take place on the enhanced cooperation platform. Now we can see camps. We can see camps at the UN in New York. We can see camps at other forums like the ITU as well as the WSIS platform. And we don't like to see this camp increasing in the divide that they have. We need to converge the views. We need to move forward. And I believe that as an experts in this field, we have a responsibility that we'd like to make. We need to see, for example, some new measures. The advisory group of the ICANN is very good, yes, but its role is advisory. But by other countries, they see this, and they have this kind of criticism to the ICANN and the GAC. Why the government within the ICANN is advisory? Why don't we have them as like part of the real platform of the ICANN or the management of the ICANN? Maybe changing of the word itself or that name of the GAC or the group of the government could help in the process of, moving forward in a positive manner rather than keeping ourselves stuck in this particular point. I think we should move forward, and the dialogue should continue in this particular part. Thank you, Drake, and I think we can come back later.
Thank you, Noreen, but I'm not going to let you off that easily. I want to clarify. You said you were speaking for the Egyptian government, and you would like to see a link between the IGF and enhanced cooperation. So do you feel that the IGF provides the proper platform for discussion of enhanced cooperation?
And this is my personal view from Egypt, and I think that, yes, the Internet Governance Forum could play a vital role in the enhanced cooperation discussion, but maybe as a point of to start with, I think maybe if an idea like a working group that was mentioned in the morning session, a multi-stakeholder working group resembles to the WGIG one, for example, could start the discussion, and then the deliberation of this working group could feed in the Internet Governance Forum and see how we can move forward from that.
Sounds good. Joy? Would you like to bring up the rear with some integrative and further forward-looking suggestions?
I would, Bill. I'm somewhat concerned that you might have characterised and assumed that I would be a negative person on enhanced cooperation, but nonetheless, I think when we talk about enhanced cooperation and taking stock, I think that it's not a simple yes or no answer. I think the reality is we've seen some extraordinary successes, we've seen some spectacular failures, we've seen some interesting new developments, and we've seen some moving sideways and some standing still. So I think it would be wrong to seek to answer the question with a clear yes or no. We're in a process of evolution. And we need to look at that moment of time and see our trajectories and check ourselves and our navigation through them honestly and reflectively. And I think in that case, I would say that our progress is not linear. We're seeing more nuance and complexity. And I think I would completely agree with Raoul that the universe, and Parminder as well, I mean, the universe of internet-related public policy issues is expanding rapidly. And it's far expanded beyond what was envisaged in the Tunis Agenda. And I think that's something to be embraced as a wonderful thing in a way that the internet has given us. But at the same time, I think there are challenges, particularly for civil society, in watching what governments are doing with their responsibilities and not only their roles. And I notice not many of us have talked today about the responsibilities of government. So the case study I want to particularly refer to is around human rights in relation to internet governance, because we've seen, and this is a positive thing, in the last 2 years, 85 governments agree on a resolution in the United Nations Human Rights Council that the same human rights we have offline should apply online. And that's an extraordinary expression of enhanced cooperation amongst governments about their responsibilities, which underpin their internet governance role. But at the same time, what we see is more governments violating those rights. We see internet shutdowns becoming a regular occurrence in many countries, seriously undermining the stability of critical internet resources. And no longer can we assume that, it's just about the packets of data travelling across the network. The governments want to interfere because of the contents of those packets. And that's the problem that we've got in terms of looking at, for example, the IGF, and saying, well, there are some governments, and I acknowledge them, who have the same representatives that come to the IGF, that go to the Human Rights Council, that participate in the GAC and ICANN, that go to other multi-stakeholder forums. But our lived experience is that there are also governments who do not cooperate, and even in their own government agencies, about what their government is saying in the Human Rights Council, its behaviour in the GAC, or its representatives here. So I think there are some opportunities for us to speak frankly about that. And it's difficult for civil society as well, I think, therefore, to track across those groups, build relationships meaningfully with governments, and have those changing. So I think that we would say yes, there's been some developments. That's good, but we see much more could be happening, particularly in terms of that role. I think the other thing that I would say, particularly as a GNSO counsellor in ICANN and having come into the ICANN space through CCTLD experience, I think that, yes, we see tensions amongst stakeholders, but I do see a strengthening of multi-stakeholder as a way of working. And increasingly we see that decisions in internet public policy that are not made in multi-stakeholder ways will be viewed as illegitimate. So, for example, we see in relation to SOPA, in relation to PIPA, in relation to bilateral trade agreement negotiations, that civil society and other stakeholders are insisting that good public policy in relation to the internet must be made in multi-stakeholder ways. So, APC has been very supportive of the Internet Governance Forum, even as these universes are expanding in which we must operate. And we've reached to have new collaborative relationships with stakeholders, which I think, but for the IGF, perhaps we might not have, with the technical community, for example, to develop shared interests and shared values around human rights and internet protocols or other matters. So I think when we're in a process of evolution, when we grow, there are some moments of beauty, there are some moments of clumsiness, some moments of extraordinary regret about things that might have been. But I think overall we're positive. We're positive about developments. We have supported, a new forum for the broader public policy discussions, and I think that's needed. But we also are a strong supporter of the IGF itself. So thanks. That would be my opening remarks.
Thank you very much. And I think the addition of human rights as an element where greater enhanced cooperation on policy is required is a new dimension that we often don't hear in this discussion. So it's very useful. I'd like to give the panelists an opportunity to respond to each other. If there are some particular points they'd like to pick up on, I see Tarek. Let's start with you.
Thank you, Bill. Actually, a couple of responses. First of all, concerning what has been said about the GAC, and that someone wants to see a more active role of the GAC in managing the ICANN. And I want to say not one single constituency is managing ICANN. And the business constituency is not managing ICANN, the civil society is not managing ICANN, but the board of ICANN has its bylaws and is compromised and is, coming together from different constituencies. And GAC have their representative as well. So they are part of the board and they send their representative to the board, and the input is there completely from the GAC, well liaison to the board. In addition to that, within the bylaws, the GAC GAC member, the GAC board member cannot be removed, and there are also a couple of improvements for the relation between the GAC and the board that has been there within the ATRT concerning the response from the board that has to come within a couple of certain number of days, and if it is not following a certain advice from the GAC. So there has been a great improvement in the relation, so it's not just a side organization that is there just on the side. It's a constituency within ICANN that has its special status and that has a role that is growing more and more, and the affirmation of commitment have empowered that role more and more, and even the Egyptian representative was very active in that, Manal Ismail, within the last couple of years. Concerning our dear friend from India, you are not bringing unpleasant news necessarily. What you are saying, we are to a great extent in agreement when it comes to the broader definition of internet governance. Yes, we all say internet governance is not only critical internet resources and the management of critical internet resources. Are there global issues that need global cooperation? The answer is definitely yes. Security is on top of them. Data protection and privacy is on top of them. Net neutrality, and as you have mentioned, internet intermediaries. And we should not blame the OECD that it took leadership and address those issues. They have brought together a couple of experts in, again, multi-stakeholder model to address global issues that they are facing, simply because the internet has blown the borders, the geographical borders that used to be there between the nations. And let me add on top of that, and I mentioned to hate Egypt for a third time, but they have even invited developing countries to participate. We have the deputy minister from Egypt, member within this committee as an observer, participating and giving input for many years about child online protection, for example. So it is not completely a closed club as people think. It is open also for developing countries, and can participate more and more. And other fora are also invited to produce their input when it comes to these global policy issues and public policy issues that the world is facing when it comes to cybersecurity, when it comes to child protection, when it comes to multilingualism, when it comes to e-content, when it comes to many issues that the world is facing. Definitely, yes, we need enhanced cooperation. Definitely, we need more involvement from governments within the dialogue, because at the end of the day, they are responsible for their public policies within their domains. So I share your view. Yes, internet governance and enhanced cooperation is not only about critical internet resources. The wider perspective is open, and open for different fora, OECD and others, to bring their input to the global discussion and to the IGF. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tarek. Raul, would you like to add something?
Yes, thank you, Bill. I think that's what Parminder said earlier is very right, I think. And he was wrong in saying that nobody has said before that enhanced cooperation should be focusing much more than critical internet resources. I had said that, but no problem to recognize that I agree with him. I think that's I provided some examples of what is happening in LACNIC, but for illustrating better this aspect of the enhanced cooperation, let me say, for example, that LACNIC participates in, we usually attend all the ministerial meetings in the Caribbean, for example, organized by the Caribbean Telecommunications Union. We are members of the Inter-American Telecommunication Commissions, and we participate there, providing, contributing with the documents and participating in all discussions about many topics, also providing capacity building when it is required by government. But probably the most important thing is that we have a permanent seat in the formal mechanism of the Information Society Ministerial Conference from Latin America and the Caribbean, and so the things that are discussed in this mechanism is much broader than just the critical internet resources, and we are committed in the discussions of all the aspects of all the topics that are covered in that mechanism. We have made really the huge progresses in Latin America and the Caribbean and in enhanced cooperation. So we in LACNIC are very proud about those achievements, but those have not been just our achievements, are achievements of the governments and the civil society. All of us have worked together with the same view. I don't know the model of the governance model of OECD. I'm not familiar with the OECD governance model, so I cannot speak in favor nor against of those mechanisms. But based on what Parminder says, it seems that those examples that I provide from Latin America, probably OECD and the Council of Europe, those are just several examples of enhanced cooperation. But they are not. They don't seem that to show that the enhanced cooperation process is something finished. I think that is something alive, and we have to continue working on that. And there are many things to do in different fields. So I put an example earlier. For example, in that's WICIT. Speaking about public policies will be set up in WICIT, and the decisions taken on WICIT will impact in public policies in globally and also individually in all the member states, in the countries of member states. This is a mechanism that is not multi-stakeholder. The participation is very expensive, membership of ITU is very expensive, participation in the conference is very expensive, and the capacity of the ability of influencing the decisions in those conferences is very limited. So it is just an example of how we have to continue working to enhancing the cooperation toward having more multi-stakeholder equal participation, as Carlos Afonso said early in the morning, in different components of internet governance.
Thank you, Raul. We're going to go to audience discussion very soon. There's quite a lot of people who I think probably have things to say, and we've got time to do it. But I'd just like to get one last word for Jeff. And yeah.
Thanks. I just wanted to point out that I don't think it's this panel that has focused on critical internet resources and enhanced cooperation. I think the entire debate, to me, has seemed to be in the context of should there be some government cooperation that would impact the existing organizations that are dealing with critical internet resources. That said, I do agree that internet policy certainly is much broader than that, and I see the OECD and the COE and other developments as a very positive attempt to, as Nermeen said, to create greater harmony of policy, among and between countries. But the next critical step in that is to have the countries honor those policies at home and implement them, and that was the spirit of the OECD principles. This is what the countries were going to agree to do within their own borders to implement the policies. That's very different than establishing policies that are going to apply to other countries or across. And so I think the way that we see some progress being made to create those harmonies and then to follow through, as Joy said, is a very positive development, but that's a very different scenario and background than a lot of what this debate is about, I think. So.
It's undoubtedly true that if you would define this as progress, there's been some shifts in the sense that if you go back to 2005 or even earlier, or the WIGIG report and much of the other debate, a lot of the discussion around enhanced cooperation often became synonymous with this notion of oversight over ICANN, that we needed an intergovernmental body that was going to tell ICANN in the last instance what to do. There were even people who argued that an existing international organization might take on this role from the GAC and so on. Now, if I understand, we're talking about having a platform with strong multi-stakeholder dimensions to discuss broader ranges of issues. That seems to me a significant shift in the discussion, right? I don't know whether that's a shift that all governments are fully on board with. But if it is a shift, but it is a shift, and I would be curious to know if they are. Parminder, a last word from you, and then I really want to go to the audience.
Yeah, thank you, and thank you for the panelists agreeing to shift the discussion more towards the broader public policy issues. Answering Jeff, it's not true that, and if you read the IPSA statements and developing country statements the last few years, they clearly say that we are talking about broader issues. They always also say that this is an issue and this issue never goes away. The Tunis agenda is written in a manner which says these are the broader issues, and the next paragraph says also includes. So I do not think that everybody has been focusing on it, but some people have been focusing on it. The constitution of the panel also focuses on it, and that should be balanced. Now, the second issue, a lot of people have said OECD is like a regional group. You can go and have a SAARC, the South Asian group, can have your own recommendations, but that is not what it is about. OECD, there are two problems with the OECD model. One, the OECD model makes intergovernmental processes-based policies, principles, and tells others, bigger groups, which is the UN, not to make policies in the same manner. That's problem number one. Two, they call the principles which they make, okay, it comes from the Democrats, the US Democrats party's resolution, not a resolution, manifesto on internet, which says, we have developed global principles at OECD. We have developed global principles for OECD. Let's not even read the Republican manifesto, and that's how they talk about it. They went to Japan recently, and they were together developing international principles. And this is a bigger issue than just saying that Latin America can do it and SAARC can do it. They call them global principles, they develop them, and then go around and tell other peoples that if you want to align your economies and your systems to us, then do follow this. This is undemocratic. This is not the way things get done. And it's not acceptable by any civil society at any global forum. So that's the difference between what you call as the OECD model and any regional model. And the issue is for me, I put it in a different manner. OECD's Council on Making Internet Policies have 35 members. Would here anybody be opposed to opening that 35 members to 180 members? Now that's the simple principle, and that's the platform of enhanced cooperation. And if you open it, I think the question is gone, and it's a simple democratic point.
Thank you very much, Parminder. Since you mentioned both U.S. Democratic and Republican parties, there is something going on tomorrow in the U.S., and we have somebody here, but also she's been involved in the OECD kind of thing, so perhaps, Fiona, a last word from you before we go to the floor.
Sure, and I won't speak to some of the other broader party politics of tomorrow, of course, but I think it's important to keep in mind the motivation behind the OECD Internet policy-making principles, and quite frankly, as we as the United States were trying to figure out what was the next step in Internet governance, what's the next step in enhanced cooperation, the conversation here focuses a lot on the domain name system because we're very much involved in that, and we were able to make some progress in the GAC, we're able to make some progress with the affirmation, with the ANA functions contract, everywhere that we're able to actually do something operationally at NTIA, we do, and we try to follow these principles and this approach. We're doing it domestically with commercial data privacy, and a part of our privacy effort and exercise recognizes the importance of international operability and working with stakeholders, and we're working in APEC on that regard as well. But the motivation for the OECD Internet policy-making principles, quite frankly, was our colleagues in Brazil. As we were traveling and doing bilateral meetings, the Brazilians presented to us their Internet policy principles that were developed through their multi-stakeholder Brazilian Internet Steering Group model, and we thought those were great. And so the question was, well, should we establish some U.S. ones, or would it make more sense, in the spirit of an enhanced cooperation model, actually try to get other colleagues to develop these principles? And that was the motivation for these principles. The discussion in the OECD involved, the OECD is focused on the economics of these issues, and that's what the principles are tailored towards. The OECD dynamic also has other stakeholders that participate through advisory groups, so it has a multi-stakeholder dynamic and framework to it, different from existing UN institutions. It's one of the reasons that we wanted to go there. And the idea, again, was to continue to build the coalition and to further elaborate on the WSIS outcomes in a way that we thought was positive and constructive. So I'm a little bit perplexed as to your interpretation of them and how they're being used, but that was our motivation and why we continue to use them and continue to advocate them and continue to encourage others to look at these principles and adopt them. And again, the origins and model of these principles was actually Brazil's wonderful document. So.
I have to say I'm a bit concerned about this Brazilian hegemony over the United States, but okay, it's a multipolar world, so okay, that's good. We've seen shifts. All right then. Well, one thing that I think is interesting for those who were involved in the summer discussions in the CSTD, is that there was almost a consensus on creating some sort of a working group structure that could start to look at some of these broader issues, but it broke down at the last minutes, and it seemed that part of the problem there had to do with whether or not it would be truly multi-stakeholder or not. I mean, my recollection is the United States was ready to do it, but there were some governments that did not want a fully participatory multi-stakeholder setting. And so the question becomes, if one does think that there are these broader issues that must be addressed, is the CSTD possibly a place to do it, or would the Internet Governance Forum, which has in its DNA a truly multi-stakeholder, peer-based kind of dialogue, perhaps be a more useful option? So things to consider. We have many enhanced cooperation mavens, experts in the audience. We have 35 minutes until the sandwiches. So let's invite discussion. There's a mic over there. People are already waiting. So we start with the two bills. Is there only one mic in this room, or there's another mic in the back? Maybe we could have one on the left side and one on the right. Okay, so Bill Wilcock.
Okay. I'd like to correct some misimpressions in the wake of Prime Minister's characterization of the OECD and the ICCP particularly. Tarek was absolutely right when he said that it is an exemplar of multi-stakeholderism, having just been through the 3-year process of producing an OECD document. Not only were 30-some-odd governments very actively involved, but they brought back comments from their constituents within their countries. That's the primary source, in fact, of the comments back from each of the member governments. But beyond that, both the Internet technical community, the international business community, and civil society were all directly represented in the process. The Internet technical community had 38 different Internet governance organizations participating. The Internet business community, the international business community was about a dozen, and civil society had more than 110 different organizations. And each one of these is themselves a multi-stakeholder organization, right? So it's difficult for me to understand how a multi-stakeholder organization composed of multi-stakeholder organizations could be characterized as anything other than a reasonable example of multi-stakeholderism.
The problem is that the documents from developing countries are not read. Did you read the CIR proposal? Did you read the India's proposal for Committee on Internet Rights, Internet-related policies? Of course you haven't, because it exactly picks up the OECD model of the same participation as you are talking about and improves it by making more structured and more meetings of those advisory groups, and also writes in the proposal that there would be a clear working relationship between the SERP and the IGF, which is again a qualitative improvement over the OECD model, which you say is hugely and basically multi-stakeholder, and the CIR proposal has been condemned for not being multi-stakeholder. I don't understand how does that work.
Okay. Can I suggest that perhaps the dialogue shouldn't stay too focused on the OECD? We can think perhaps a little bit more broadly about, there's the fundamental question the ambassador suggested in the first session. Is there a need for a platform? Are there issues that are not being addressed? Maybe we could get more engagement on that if we go into the particulars of how another international organization works. Boy, it's very strange when you have the headphones on. I think we could be here debating the details of that organization all day. But okay, I take your point. I understand why you're raising it, Parmenter. Bill.
Sure.
Please introduce yourself.
Bill Smith with PayPal. It's strange now hearing all the other noise. I've a few comments, then responses actually to Parmenter's questions. With respect to ICANN and the GAC, and the comments that being in an advisory role is not sufficient, there are some, and I actually would take this view, that the role is more significant than others, other stakeholders within the ICANN world. And I would point to the GAC involvement with the RAA negotiations that are currently going on. No other stakeholder has such a place at the table, and in particular, registrants. Registrants are, in fact, unrepresented contractually at ICANN. SOPA and PIPA, I'm glad they were brought up. I am embarrassed as an American that these came out as policy making or potential policy making, and to me they're an excellent example of policy making in a vacuum. The technical community was not really our input was not solicited. We were ignored when we spoke, and fortunately, the community, the larger community, took some action, and the policy did not happen. To me, it's a great example of policy that was done in a vacuum, not appropriate, and why we need multi-stakeholder representation in policy making. The Human Rights Commission, an excellent example of policy making that was done well, in the sense that the policy was made by the experts on human rights, and they expanded and extended into the internet and said, these rights that exist in the physical world exist on the internet as well. That's an excellent example of how to do these types of policy making. Jeff's point about binary choices and I believe binary choices and consensus are antithetical. When given two choices, this or that, it lends to a vote. Voting is not about consensus making, it's about winners and losers. Parminder asked a question on the OECD. I believe the questions were, are there policy issues? Yes, there are policy issues. We need to address them. Where can they be discussed? They can be discussed anywhere. Specifically, you asked, why do some people object, or we participate at the OECD, but we object to other areas? I can't speak for others. I can speak for PayPal. We prefer fora that are open, transparent, and equitable, like those others that we participate in at ICANN, at the IETF, at the W3C, and on and on and on. And they are not necessarily centralized. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. Multiplicity in with a decentralized architecture like the internet is a good thing. Having a single place, the only place that you can discuss issues, may not be beneficial. And so that's our reason for why we choose to participate in places like the OECD and these other places. And we will question, okay, when new organizations are being set up or new entities, if we cannot participate there on a free, open, and equitable basis, like we can in these others. Thank you.
Thank you, Bill.
I have a small comment, very small.
Yes, and then Nermeen also would like to get in. Is there, and before, can I just ask, is there nobody on this side of the room who would like to say anything? Because there are two mics. Can we move one of the mics over there for the Alejandro? Could you maybe? I'd like to get more people involved than just the right wing over here. Okay.
See, my response is exactly the same response I gave to the earlier speaker. And I'm not sure whether it was very clear, because earlier speaker said the same thing, that OECD is very open, transparent, and that's why we go and participate there. And you said we oppose new proposals who are not like that. I clearly said that India's Committee on Internet-Related Policy proposal takes the same model as OECD's multi-stakeholder participation and definitely improves on it. And I'm ready to get into any discussion on this. So to say that we have already decided that a committee without reading the proposal is like that is not a problem I can do anything about. It is as open, or rather much more open, than the OECD mechanism. I'm open for any discussion, and if you can prove that it is not, I'll simply give up any kind of advocacy on it.
If you wanted to discuss India's proposal, you should have brought that up at the beginning. I answered your question. Now you're changing the question. Thank you.
Yes, thanks, Bill. I would like to come again on the GAC side so that my earlier comments are clear. I was representing some other governments that are not present here, especially from the Arab region as well as African region. Egypt is very much active in the GAC. We have Manal, our colleague, used to be the vice chairman of the GAC, so we know in Egypt we know very much about the GAC and the bylaws of the ICANN and so on and so forth. But I'm trying to bring other views to the table so that we can tackle the issue in an appropriate manner, to have some balance. Maybe some of you will ask me why these countries are not attending, why they are not active on the Internet Governance platform or the ICANN platform. I would say that maybe we need, as an experts, to rebrand ourselves again and to disseminate the information, how the ICANN is developing, how the GAC is developing, and how we are more open nowadays for more, participation from all kind of government stakeholders and so on and so forth. This is my comment here. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Noreen. What I'd like to do maybe to advance the level of participation, let's take several inputs from the audience and then respond to them in clumps. So I see three people over here on my left, starting with Peter. So Peter, go ahead.
It's okay. Yeah. Okay. Good. Well, I'm Peter Major from CSCD. It's okay. CSCD has been mentioned several times in the discussion, and there was a question whether we should continue with the experience we had with a multi-stakeholder working group within the CSCD and to go in this direction, pursuing our efforts in the enhanced cooperation, or whether we should find something else. Well, during our discussions, we always said that we have two different and distinct processes. So I am not sure whether we can say two different things and come to some kind of agreement. When we say that we should bring it to IGF, the discussion about enhanced cooperation, I have no problems with that. However, probably CSCD members wouldn't like it. So getting back to the last meeting we had, and especially the CSTD formal meeting when we had the resolution, and we had almost come to an agreement on a multi-stakeholder working group, and basically that was the only thing we didn't agree on. Or let me put it in that way: there were some countries which just didn't agree on the multi-stakeholder process. Now, I cannot see these countries represented here, and in fact I cannot see countries represented in other fora who objected to this multi-stakeholder model. Now, the question is, here we have very like-minded people. We have differences in many aspects, but basically we do agree on basic principles. However, in the CSTD we didn't have that. So my question is, how can we achieve it? And probably we should have them engaged in these kind of discussions, but I don't have the recipe how. So probably I just launched the idea, please do help us to get these people involved, and this is the way to go forward. Thank you.
Hello. I'm Jack with the APC, and I guess in all of the conversations that's been happening this morning, what was interesting for me is how can we talk about enhanced cooperation and models of enhanced cooperation and all the principles that comes within it in terms of how to actually also support the participation of civil society on equal footing. I think we talked about it. It was mentioned briefly earlier this morning, and there's an assumption that multi-stakeholder will definitely bring in civil society on an equal footing, but that's not necessarily the case. And if whether we're using ICANN as a model or IGF as a model or, HRC as one of the viable spaces to talk about improving government responsibility, in all of these discussions, I think we also need to talk about how to support civil society participation at an equal and diverse footing, and that's all. Thanks.
Henriette Esterhuizen, also of the APC. I just want to make 3 points. I think firstly, evolution is often also linked with the concept of survival of the fittest and survival of the strongest. So I think evolution is good as long as we recognize that evolution doesn't necessarily create a more equal distribution of power and influence. That is a challenge that has to be taken on and addressed in its own right. And then on the OECD, I think the OECD process, speaking as civil society who's participated in that, has been a very good process, but it is not without its flaws. For example, when the OECD principles for policy making were accepted, civil society did not support those. And yet that's been written out of the history of those principles. So I think in that particular multi-stakeholder process, our relatively, our lack of power needs to be recorded, it needs to be reflected. And the fact that we did not support those principles, it's fine, they go ahead, that's the process. But it should not be written out of the record that there was actually dissent. And I think a healthy multi-stakeholder process needs to be able to accommodate that. And then thirdly, just with regard to the SERP process, I think what's interesting, and I think Parmender's point that people don't read that process is relevant, but I think that process really illustrates how things are different in the internet and how we need to not just make policy differently, but also, in South Africa during the post-apartheid era, we used to talk about talks. And before we went into negotiation, we had a whole period which was just talking about talking. And I think in internet governance, unless the process of deciding how to come up with new modalities and new ways of incorporating different actors and addressing concerns is really inclusive, it's not going to have legitimacy. And I think the SERP proposal illustrates that, how a proposal that goes to the General Assembly, that is put forward by a government before it has really been discussed in the broader community, in a sense, the merit in that proposal becomes very difficult to really extract and discuss because the process in which it was formulated in our context lacks legitimacy.
I think that's an interesting point. Since I know you guys are healthy and can stand, before we lose too much focus, I'd like to ask the people on the panel whether they'd like to reply to any of the 3 points that have just been made. We'll start with Joy and then just... does everybody want a piece? We'll just roll down? Okay. And brief responses, please.
Thank you. I just wanted to respond to Piers' question about principles for internet governance. I mean, I think that was an incredibly useful point to raise, and some of the civil society groups have spent the last 2 days meeting informally with each other in the Best Bits event, and have been discussing this very issue of how might it be that a set of principles, a shared principles for internet governance might be able to be developed around the Internet Governance Forum, and I think that would be a useful idea to perhaps pick up and talk through over the next few days. And then the other point was just, I think, in relation to Bill's point over here. I think that security is an issue that it's a good example of one of those issues that we need better multi-stakeholder forums to discuss. Because I think, for example, governments are increasingly acting to enhance security around, in the name of national security, for example, deep packet inspection, restrictions on anonymity, registration requirements for registrants, and those things make the internet more secure for governments, but not for civil society and not for registrants. So I think finding ways to talk about that in multi-stakeholder forums with technical and business input is actually quite critical. Thanks.
Just a quick comment that I think there is a relation between the discussion that we're having about legitimacy as well as this idea of consensus really being the way to truly address policy issues. And sometimes I think the enhanced cooperation debate seems to be getting into a process of, are there ways to make decision making that take it out of that process, or are we trying to have a platform, as we heard this morning, that's really about a way to build more consensus? But in order to do that, I think we have to have something where it doesn't feel like one stakeholder group has a different set of voting processes than the others, and whether it's actions that businesses are taking or actions that government is taking. I do think that's a very good point now, that how you go about reaching the decisions are going to be scrutinized just as much as the end result, to say, does it seem like something that is living up to that high multi-stakeholder standard.
Thanks, Jeff. Nothing? Fiona, Tariq, and well, we'll just roll on.
Yeah, I think maybe just to close out, again, the OECD exercise, and one that we think has been very successful, was really sort of pulling stakeholders together. And again, I think Henriette's right. There was, at the end of the day, some concerns about civil society on a particular part of the text, but recognition that the process was a good one. And again, the point was to get stakeholders together to talk about issues, to develop policies that they could then use domestically and as they dealt with these issues. My recollection of your proposal, the one that I did read, and I haven't read it for a couple of years, I have to admit, specifically asked the General Assembly to establish oversight mechanisms and negotiate treaties and do dispute resolution. Those aren't topics that we've discussed in any other venues or proposed discussing in any other venues. And again, I think Henriette made a particularly good point, which is one of the reasons there was such concern about the proposal is that it went straight to the UN. There wasn't a vetting with stakeholders in the countries, and there wasn't a vetting in this group in particular. And last year's IGF, I think, demonstrated that. But I mean, that just would be my observation.
Just a quick response to what has been again mentioned about the GAC case. I take the comment, and I agree. We need to be doing a better job in branding the improvements that happen to the GAC. We need more to engage with the rest of the governments on a wider scale, specifically in the developing world, and make sure that they are inclusive within the process of the GAC, and that they are more active, and that they are more involved in public policy issues that are there. So yes, we have a homework to do in Africa and in many other developing countries to involve them more and more within the GAC engagement process.
Yes, about the CIRP proposal, we as civil society are for as much public participation in policy making as possible. Right now, we are engaging with the government of India to make a bill on public participation in policy making. However, we should not lose sight of real politics. The less powerful cannot be condemned to all the moralizing. The IPSA joint statements for a couple of months, if not years, have been asking for a working group and enhanced cooperation. It was not discussed. It was not agreed to. Discussions were not taking place on enhanced cooperation, at which point India came up with the CIRP proposal, which was preceded by a seminar, which was an IPSA seminar. And the CIRP proposal, and I've seen no proposal, institutional proposals to the UN say that kind of a thing. At the end it says, we want this, but we want to hear other people speak about it. Now you can condemn the less powerful to all the moralizing and get OECD away with, we don't do anything bad, we make proposals among the rich countries and we impose it over the others, but it's pretty fine, is not acceptable. And since the last year when the CIRP proposal has come, I have seen the discussion in this room. People said, we know CIRP doesn't have this model, and I said they have it. I said no, they don't have it. I haven't read it, but they don't have it. Now this is not a discussion on CIRP proposal either. And on what Peter's point was, and the working group, which I think is a bigger outcome of this meeting, I think at this stage we should go for a CSTD working group on the model of the working group on IGF improvements, which is membership plus stakeholders group, because this issue is now quite political. It's not just about learning about things. I hear a lot of mapping. I mean, what kind of mapping? And this is a real outcome, because people do mapping instead of the working group. What mapping? OECD is in the middle of that mapping, and we don't want to talk about OECD's role in internet policy making. So I think it's a very political debate right now. Should go to a CSTD working group on the same model as the working group on IGFs. Thank you very much, and sorry for taking a longer time.
I just want to bring to attention of the group that the stock-taking session on Friday will be tackling the internet governance principles, including the OECD, Council of Europe, and others. So maybe the place there will be for expanding the discussion over this particular issue. Thank you.
Thanks. I'm going to go to these healthy and patient men on the right here from ISOC, but before, yes, and of course Heather too. But before I do, I just want to, because Parminder has made much of the SERP and saying that people haven't read it. I just want to remind us of what it asked for. It says the SERP shall be mandated to undertake the following tasks: develop and establish public policies with a view to ensuring coordination and coherence in cross-cutting internet-related global issues, coordinate and oversee the bodies responsible for technical and operational functioning of the internet, including global standard setting, facilitate negotiation of treaties, conventions, and agreements on internet-related public policy, address development issues, promote and protect human rights, undertake arbitration and dispute resolution, and crisis management with relation to the internet. This sounds a bit beyond the OECD model to me, but I may be missing something. Okay, so Alejandro.
Thank you very much. This is radio, your friendly radio IGF from Baku. First, Parminder, with due respect, I would demand from you the same respect. People do read the documents and find them flawed. I read the CARP after the IPSA document. Please speak. I did read the IPSA documents. I was at the last year's IPSA discussion. Basically, in my view, it was shredded to pieces. CARP reincarnates IPSA with steroids, and as Bill has read it, it goes well beyond public discussion forum, and it intends to create a committee that has attributions over all internet governance mechanisms and problems and issue areas. And that, to me, is again very close to the illusion of a single world government. It leaves behind the pragmatic approaches that have solved problems actually in internet governance. I will pick on a second issue very briefly, which is the role of the GAC. And I'm addressing this to Nareen specifically because I think there's a very a much broader lesson to be obtained here as we go indeed beyond the numbers, names and numbers. If you look at organizations or groupings like the Anti-Phishing Working Group, you will see that there's a very intense cooperation between all stakeholders there. It doesn't take the same form as it takes in ICANN because law enforcement concerns in the Anti-Phishing Working Group are much more vivid. So law enforcement officials and authorities are much more present there. They don't have a governmental advisory committee. They don't make decisions that bind the governments, but they do make decisions that allow the fight of financial fraud through the internet in the form of phishing. I chaired the committee that made the reform of ICANN in 2003, and we had a very, very strong discussion in the community-wide about the role of the GAC. At the time, we discussed with the GAC as open options as having 5 seats in the ICANN board elected by the GAC. And it was the consideration of the GAC itself that led to keeping the advisory role. This was based on at least two very strong reasons, which I think we have to keep in mind when we look at internet governance more broadly. The first one is that ICANN or the APWG or many of these other organizations that we can conceive presently or in the future actually have to make decisions, and they run into risks of liability, as has been mentioned, as Parminder, for example, has mentioned. ICANN is subject to lawsuits mostly in the US, but it could be subject to lawsuits everywhere else. Government advisory committee members who were board members would actually be part of that liability. And governments should not be put in that position where your representative can be put in jail or at least put in financial jeopardy by taking part in a decision that was made by a private body. That's one decision. And the other one that we heard, which honestly is also very interesting and realistic, is that it would be forever before the GAC would be able to devise an internal process to choose 3 or 5 representatives. Even if we said 5, making them 1 per region, the process to create this representation would take forever in order to make sure it was equitable, participative, and so forth. So the advisory with steroids that we have is a good model for many of the other possible organizations we can imagine in other fields of internet governance. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Alex. Marcus Kumar?
Yes, thank you. I'm Marcus Kumar, Internet Society. I listened with some sympathy to what Parminder had to say. Indeed, the OECD is not global. It has limited membership. I mean, it has global reach, but it is not universal. However, the SIR proposal is not an answer to fill this gap. It is deeply flawed insofar as it's just a committee. It does not have any organization behind it with substantive know-how as the OECD is. The OECD has a very good, excellent secretariat that provides input into the work of the ICCP. Just establishing a committee in New York doesn't do anything if you don't provide secretariat support. And then it is a UN committee. You can try and make it as open as possible, but it's still up to UN procedures. I know a little bit what I'm talking about. I worked for the UN before, and the IGF is as far as you can go without following traditional UN procedures. And you can only do that because it is not, strictly speaking, a UN body. It is a meeting convened by the Secretary General, and that gives it a little bit more flexibility. I'm familiar with these discussions from a different context. When I worked for government, developing countries often complained that the OECD was a limited and an exclusive club. But as a government, Switzerland always defended the point of view that UNCTAD was here as a think tank for the developing world. So what about taking this to UNCTAD? UNCTAD exists, is an existing organization, and if you want to have advice, UNCTAD has analytical capabilities. But looking back, and there are a few veterans here who served in the working group on internet governance, when we actually came up with a proposal to suggest the formation of an IGF, we looked precisely at what are the gaps, and we said there lacks a place where we can discuss these issues that are not taken up elsewhere. And we actually looked at the OECD as a role model, but we knew we would not be able to get agreement to establish a new organization of the caliber of the OECD. So that is basically a very loose role model, a very loose platform that follows an OECD role model in favoring exchange of view, in favoring the sharing of best practices, and we thought the IGF would precisely be able to fulfill this role. Then, when you look at the WSIS text, the enhanced cooperation and the paragraphs on the IGF are actually quite intertwined. The separation came afterwards. Some countries insisted, no, these are two separate processes, and now we have various GA resolutions that reaffirm that the two processes are separate but complementary, or whatever you have it. However, it's worth looking at it. If you feel that there is this gap, why not use the IGF for that? So whether the IGF is the answer to enhanced cooperation, this is, I think, one of the issues we can also discuss. We definitely, I remember when we had this consultation in May, I said the IGF definitely has been a catalyst for enhancing cooperation. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And finally, Heather, the chair of the GAC, as it happens. Very convenient.
Thank you. Good day, everyone. As Bill explained, I'm the chair of the Governmental Advisory Committee at ICANN, and I work for the Canadian Department of Industry. As there have been a few references to the GAC, I thought I'd better announce my presence in the room. But really, all to say that I've been listening with interest to the discussions about enhanced cooperation and the various institutions. We heard from a number of speakers just how many institutions are relevant in the process, and that the Governmental Advisory Committee and ICANN are one part of that picture. So I will have the opportunity on the first panel after the lunchtime to talk more about the GAC and some of the progress made and the areas where there could be further work and improvement. So we will be coming back to the discussion about the GAC and ICANN a bit later. But it's worth noting that specific to ICANN's role, coordinating the names and numbers for the Internet, the GAC has arrived at various sets of principles. And so they're yet another part of the picture that's relevant when you're talking about setting principles related to an aspect of the Internet. And to the comments from my colleague from Egypt, I think it's absolutely appropriate to remind ourselves that we do need broad participation, and that includes from developing countries in the GAC. And that I again will talk a bit more about after the lunch panel. So thank you.
And speaking of lunch, it's about 2 minutes away. So we're going to do a final roll down the table with quick responses. And I just want to offer my own, which is Marcus made the point about staff. The CSTD is staffed by UNCTAD. And so there is that there. The problem is, again, the participants in CSTD, as Peter Major pointed out, do not all want to have a multi-stakeholder process. So then the question is, IGF is multi-stakeholder, but does not have a substantial secretariat. So these are things to think about going forward, I would suggest. Joy, would you like to offer a closing benediction?
Bless you, Bill. Yeah, I think my reflection would be that I think I'm not pessimistic about the current state of enhanced cooperation. I do see trajectories going forward that are positive and where there is better engagement that's possible. And very much from civil society perspective, where we support the IGF and we very much want to continue to cooperate in our role. But I just want to pick up the point about how hard it is actually for some stakeholders to participate across these forums, not only for civil society but particularly for governments from developing countries, and also for the business community, the private sector at times, across multiple events. So I do have a plea, I suppose, also for some rationale, rationalising, if you like, of those places for engagement.
Thanks, Bill. A final thought would just be one of the points in the text that you mentioned was the call for existing organizations to report out on a regular basis on the progress that's being made. And we've heard great things today about what's happening, but I think there was at least one round of input that the Secretary General received, but it hasn't been as a regular part of the process as perhaps that text could have indicated. But I do think that again points back to focus on making what's already there work better and find ways to increase the participation and the cooperation with existing organizations. And it's something that again is I don't think of mapping as just some hypothetical exercise, but it's supposed to be a really ongoing rigorous type of analysis on how are you doing and what can be done better. And I think that gets you out of the deadlock somewhat about passing judgment or deciding at some fundamental level about whether something is new as a starting point rather than as something that you would only do after you've exhausted the existing organizations to their fullest potential.
Thank you. The point that I wanted to make is that enhanced cooperation is not one thing. Enhanced cooperation is a big collection of actions taken by stakeholders group in order to increase the cooperation, enhancing the cooperation among them toward more multi-stakeholderism, more participation in different components of internet governance. So we don't need to discuss just about one model, which model is better than others, because one model could be appropriate for some component of the internet governance ecosystem, but not appropriate for a different one. But just for finalizing, there have been proposals for having more discussion about enhancing cooperation. when some players want to discuss something, I'm by default in favor of holding those discussions. So I favor those discussions, but I think that those discussions could not be held over specific proposals, given proposals, like the ones that have been published in the last year. So we should discuss on a blank sheet and see, try to identify where are components of internet governance that deserve to have more enhanced cooperation in order to increase the multi-stakeholder participation in them.
I think maybe just to sum up, I don't remember ever in the context of the WSIS negotiations the idea that enhanced cooperation was an end in and of itself or a process to create. It was more of a philosophy that as everyone went about their way and implementing internet policy in their respective roles and responsibilities and whatever the various versions of the text that was negotiated, people were supposed to work together in this enhanced cooperative way. And I have lost sight of at what point the idea that these are two distinct processes happened. And I think Marcus is correct. My recollection of the negotiations in Tunis was that this was, a process towards enhanced cooperation. The Internet Governance Forum was one way to do that. But as you've heard today, there are other ways that it's been happening and continue to happen. So I don't know, I get back to this idea of getting together and discussing to have a group, to solve a problem that we haven't decided what the problem is, continues to stymie anyone actually moving forward on real work here, and would suggest that if we're going to talk about enhanced cooperation, we actually talk about enhanced cooperation on what issue. The reason you hear so much about enhanced cooperation in the domain name space, because that was very much the focus of the WSIS process. The domain name system is one of the most organized parts of the UN, and as such becomes a big target for issues. But I think if folks could actually identify what are the real issues you'd like to have some cooperation on, and where do you want to see things go forward, it'd be very easy then to find different forms and venues to do it in, but there's just not going to be one place to do it. But again, I think Marcus is correct, and I'm a little confused as to when in this discussion we decided that these were two distinct parallel processes as opposed to the IGF being a venue and forum for enhanced cooperation.
I would also like to second what was said, that the IGF is a great example for enhanced cooperation year after year. Although this organization has very limited support from Secretariat and with a very small number of people, we have as a community very successful event, and not only that, we have regional events, African events, Latin American events, Arab IGFs, US IGFs that are also becoming successful. This really is a great model for enhanced cooperation and shows that the process is lively and the community is able really to carry the process together to a success. So I think we have a great model and a showcase for other disciplines outside the internet governance ecosystem via the IGF and its regional events.
Couple of questions, a couple of issues which arose in the present set of comments, and also earlier, whether they are same processes or they are different processes, and rather what did Tunis agenda mean. Tunis agenda is very clear. One of these processes was supposed to be started in the first quarter of 2006. The other process was supposed to be started in the third quarter of 2006. Same process cannot be started in 2 quarters of 2006. Now that's pretty difficult, and this can be read in the Tunis agenda, but I have very short intervention and I go to the next thing. Marcus Coomer spoke about CIRP being free float and the OECD being linked to a certain system. CIRP is linked to the UN Security General Assembly in the same way that OECD CCICP is linked to the OECD Council. He said, and that's a very problematic statement for me, OECD is a very capable system and therefore they should do policy making, and UN system is not capable. So poor guys, the uneducated guys perhaps should be left not to do their governance and let the more capable and the rich guys do their governance. It's a hugely problematic thing. And again, people should read the CIRP proposal. It says set up a research and analysis wing to inform the work of the CIRP proposal. And there is a proposal. You have to give money. You can't withdraw money from the UN and say the UN can't do it and therefore they shouldn't do it. And that's pretty problematic. Whether IGF was modeled on the OECD is a big surprise for me, because we should be then telling OECD to become like the IGF, and I've never heard any of the stakeholders going to the OECD committee and saying, you dissolve yourself and make OECD IGF and do all the work there. OECD does help making interministerial and intergovernmental policy statements, and also helps them to negotiate treaties in this area when it is required. Yes, OECD does not cover the oversight role, and I personally do believe that CIRP should not cover the oversight role, and it should be allocated to a separate system. I'm sorry, Bill, again.
Okay, I would like to second as well and join my colleagues in stating that enhanced cooperation actually is happening. Our event today is evidence for this. 10 years ago, maybe we would we wouldn't be able to have this kind of open and free discussion, stating all or exploring all the views and the ideas around it. There are some missing parts maybe, and it's our responsibilities together to try to find and fixing them all together. Efforts are being exerted by all organizations relevant, and it's our responsibility again to find ways and means how to integrate them together in the ecosystem of internet governance. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Nermeen. I promised at the beginning that we would have a conversation that would not shy away from controversy. I think we achieved our objective. I now have the pleasure to tell you that the Internet Society has prepared for you bag lunches, which are down the hall on the way to the registration on the left-hand side, and we will reconvene in 1 hour. So thank you very much for listening.